The first area that we're going to be watching very carefully this year is the retained EU law Reform and Revocation Bill that's currently going through Parliament. The bill's controversial to say the least, mainly because of the sunset clause it contains, which could revoke all secondary retained EU law in scope at the end of 2023, potentially including employment legislation such as the agency workers regulations, the working time regulations, and even 2P. Now, legislation can be saved or amended by ministers, but that provision is also controversial because of the lack of scrutiny by MPs. It's looking as though the government's going to force the bill through Parliament, but amendments during that process are very likely, so we're going to be keeping a close eye on the final version for the implications for employment lawyers. Our comprehensive practice note on retained EU law and employment gives further details of the legislation that's in scope.
Although we don't expect to see the long-awaited employment bill during 2023, many of the rights proposed in that bill may be introduced instead via government-backed private members' bills. These include changes to the process for requesting flexible working, including the right to request becoming a day one right, new rights to neonatal leave and pay, unpaid leave for carers, protection from redundancy for pregnant women and new parents, and the fair allocation of tips. Also progressing via a government-backed private members' bill is the government's promise to introduce a duty on employers to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. There are no exact timings for these changes, and some of them may be pushed into 2024.
Holiday pay continues to be a hot topic for 2023. Firstly, the Supreme Court is due to hand down its judgment in Agnew on whether a gap of more than 3 months between unlawful deductions breaks a series and limits claims for historic underpayments of holiday pay. Secondly, following on from the Supreme Court's judgment in Brazil, the government is consulting on its proposal to make holiday entitlement for part-year and irregular hours workers proportionate to the annual hours they work. And thirdly, there will be an extra bank holiday this year on Monday the 8th of May for the coronation of King Charles III.
Industrial relations developments are likely to feature in the news this year. The Strikes Minimum Service Levels Bill is currently making its way through Parliament. If passed, it would affect industrial action being taken in 6 sectors, including health, education, and transport. Unions and workers in these sectors would have to comply with requirements to maintain a minimum service level during a strike, or face losing protections against being sued or dismissed. We are also expecting the outcome of judicial review proceedings brought by various trade unions who are challenging last year's lifting of the ban on agency staff being supplied to cover for striking workers, as well as the government's long-awaited consultation on a new fire and rehire statutory code of practice.
First, the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, which includes reforms to UK GDPR and the Data Protection Act 2018. The bill's progress was paused in September, and there are likely to be amendments before it resumes. To track progress, see our legislation tracker and practice note on the bill. Second, the ICO is planning a new hub to replace the old Employment Practices Code. So far, we've seen draft guidance on workers' health information and monitoring at work, and more is expected this year. See our consultation tracker and practice note on the key data protection issues for employment lawyers. Finally, we're also expecting developments in familiar areas such as sustainable business, ESG, with diversity and inclusion and voluntary ethnicity pay gap reporting continuing to be focus areas. There are lots of cases in the pipeline too. Just to mention one here, gender critical beliefs are due to be back in the spotlight again soon, with the case of Higgs and Farmore School due to be heard by the EAT in March.